Welcome to Project Q&A's Q&A Talks. We'll be getting started here in just a few minutes. We're waiting on people to log on and join us. While we're waiting, we've got some awesome announcements coming up. We're currently looking for volunteers to explore our new website and provide us with feedback. If you're interested in looking at our new website and taking about 30 minutes to explore it and fill out a quick survey, would love to have your feedback, and you'll be entered in a chance to win some really cool prizes. We've also got Southeast Kansas Pride coming up, and we've got a ton of events for the whole week of Pride, which is September 7th through the 11th. We are having a bunch of different events online and in person. The in-person events are in Independence, Kansas. We are celebrating the 5th annual Southeast Kansas Pride, so we're really excited. It's literally been 2 years in the making because of last year we had to pivot. So we reused some of our ideas from last year and have a stellar lineup for Pride this year. Some of the things include our lunch and learn workshops, which are daily at noon and they'll be live streamed similar to this program. We have a self-care workshop, a history workshop from the Gay and Lesbian Archives of Mid-America. They're going to be talking about the LGBTQ community in the 1960s. We're really excited to bring in a organization from, I believe, Wisconsin or Michigan. It's an upper state in the Midwest, but an organization that works to help fight climate change and provide resources to the LGBTQ community that is affected by climate change. It's a really interesting presentation and something that many of us here in the Midwest don't always think about. We also have some really awesome panel discussions on September 7th and 8th. We have addiction in the LGBTQ community. And then we also have a Growing Up Out panel. And that Growing Up Out panel will feature some younger LGBTQ individuals who came out at an early age. And they'll be talking about what it is they needed from their parents and what their parents did right. So it's a great resource for parents. And it's similar to our Q&A talks. On Saturday of Pride, September 11th, we have a full lineup starting at 10 a.m. We have Pride in the Park from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. There's going to be live entertainment, vendors, a lot of different activities throughout the day. Following that, we have our Pride Gives Back, and we'll have more details coming out in July about that. It also includes a trivia event. We've got our community dinner on September 11th with our keynote speaker, Representative Stephanie Byers, who will be joining us. We're super excited to have her. And then we have our Pride Night Out, which is our typical pub crawl. It's a little different this year. There's going to be more details to come on that. And we also have on Friday, September 10th, our annual Pride Drag Show. This year, we are so excited to have Dusty Ray Bottoms from season 10 of RuPaul's Drag Race headlining the show. We have our host, everybody loves them, Amanda Masters. And then we also have performances by the rest of the Southeast Kansas Pride crew, Effie Darling, Sexual Chocolate, and Lady Berica Andrews. So we're super excited to have all them. But now for what you all are here to see is our Q&A talks, Know Your Rights, presented by Ellen Bertels. So Ellen is a graduate from the University of Kansas with a law degree, and she received her degree, or received the 2021 National PSJD Pro Bono Publico Award for the work they did launching the Gender Marker and Name Change Project. And with that, I'm gonna hand it over to Ellen.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to share my screen real quick and do the classic, announce that I'm sharing my screen thing. So I apologize. Ooh, it looks, Brandon, like I maybe can't do that. Could you give me access real quick? Anyway, while we're should it be good? Okay. Brilliant. Okay. Hi, welcome. My name is Ellen Bertels. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And I am so excited for Southeast Kansas Pride in September. You will see me there. But today I'm here to talk to you about some legal rights associated with being a member of the trans and non-binary and more broadly the gender diverse community. I usually do this presentation with my friend and colleague Delaney Heegert. They are an excellent advocate and also in my law class, but unfortunately they were not able to be here tonight. So we decided that we would rather have one of us show up and give this vital information rather than not being able to come at all. So who am I? Why am I here talking to you today? I graduated from law school this semester, just about a month ago. And during my time in law school, I helped found the Gender Marker and Name Change Clinic, or project, sometimes we called it, at the Douglas County Legal Aid Society, which is housed at KU Law. So this resource provided pro bono free representation for trans and non-binary Kansans who were seeking to change their legal name, and also support and resources with regard to other identity document changes like a passport or your driver's license or your birth certificate. This was supposed to be just like a one-time thing, and ended up being this enormous project that we undertook that was hugely successful and a really important resource to the community. And I actually got the grant funding to do this as my full-time job for the next 2 years at Campus Legal Services. So once I'm done studying for the bar, and once I pass the bar, I will be at KLS for 2 years, starting this fall, just providing resources to the trans and non-binary community here in Kansas. So I'm here to talk to you today about the legal foundation, what your rights are as a resident of Kansas or as a person born in Kansas, with regard to changing your name, changing your gender marker, and changing various identity documents after that. So I'm so sorry to have to be very lawyerly about it. I hate doing this, but I do have to say I'm not an attorney. I have not passed the bar yet. I am also not your attorney. So none of what I'm saying today is meant to be legal advice. It's not meant to create any sort of legal representation agreement between me and the audience. I'm just providing you with generally available information through the lens of someone who has done research and has worked with the LGBTQ population here in Kansas. But hopefully it can also provide you with resources if you do need an attorney, where you can find one who you can speak to who's also well-versed on this issue. So I'm going to talk about 2 different segments. We have really different audiences for this type of presentation. So I'm going to start with kind of a primer on gender identity. And this might be useful for parents of a trans or non-binary kid, family, community, loved ones. So probably more for an audience who is not trans or non-binary. The second half is going to be kind of a legal piece, which just walks you through your legal rights when it comes to gender marker and name change processes. And I do the first half. I know it might be really redundant for some people, but we also sometimes have people in the audience who really benefit from this information. So we want to start out and make sure we have a firm grounding of what we're talking about. So let's go to the basics. How do we talk about gender? The mainstream Western conceptualization of gender is that there is boy and girl. And you are born as a boy and you're born as a girl. And if you switch genders, then you become the opposite gender. That's kind of the cis-normative Western idea of gender. But we want to break that down today. So I want you to start thinking about gender less as 2 opposite poles, as a binary, and instead as a spectrum, where I heard someone refer to it as a color palette, which I think is lovely as well. So something more wibbly wobbly, less straight lines, less binary than kind of our standard conceptualization of gender. Because that's really important to understanding the way that gender not only affects the law, but also just affects the people that we love. So I also want to give you a background on how the law represents gender. This is a Kansas birth certificate. It is not the fancy one. It's the actual one that is housed with the Office of Vital Statistics. And you'll see in the top left-hand corner, there's a red circle around the female under sex. This is how the law represents your gender or your sex assigned at birth at the time that you're born. And this, as I'm sure most of you know, designates a lot of your ability to function in the world, designates how health providers treat you, how all sorts of different relationships between an individual and the world around them. But again, at least in Kansas right now and federally, the law recognizes only female and male as the available genders, right? So let's get into some definitions. Transgender, which is a term you'll hear me using a lot, is a term used to describe a person whose gender identity differs in some way from the sex that they were assigned at birth. So she's a transgender woman, they're a transgender man. That's the way we use this. It's not transgendered, it's not transing or anything like that. I think sometimes people get caught up in the language there. Just to say she's a transgender woman is an accurate representation. So the flip side of this is cisgender. This is a term used to describe a person whose gender identity conforms with the sex that they were assigned at birth. So I am a cisgender person. I was assigned female at birth, and my gender identity is still aligned with that. So I still consider myself female. That's some cisgender or cis. Non-binary is a term used to describe a person whose gender identity is neither male nor female. So this is where we start to get to the kind of like middle ground on that spectrum photo we had earlier. This is essentially just a person who doesn't conform with the binary concept of gender. You'll hear all sorts of different terms to describe this. You might hear genderqueer, gender fluid, agender. I know many people who conform to one or more of these terms, and it's very much has to do with the person's individual conception of their own gender identity. And sometimes they overlap and sometimes they don't. That's probably a lot to go into right now, so I'm not going to dig too deep into it, but just know that non-binary is an identity used to describe someone who doesn't align with the traditional notions of gender. These people, non-binary people, will also commonly use non-gendered pronouns. So they, them, theirs are common, ze, zers, zers, ze, here, here's. There's all sorts of non-gendered pronoun sets that are neo-pronouns, sometimes they call them new pronouns, that are becoming more and more kind of familiar in popular culture. So we'll get into that as well a little bit. So the gender unicorn. I have some issues with the gender unicorn, but I do think it's useful to talk through some of these terms that I'm using. So I'm going to start at the top. So your gender identity, which is that little rainbow at the top, is the way that a person internally understands their gender. Think about it as being what goes on in a person's head when they think about their gender. This is different from gender expression, which is the way that an individual presents their gender to the world. So the clothes they wear, the way that they cut their hair, whether they wear makeup, whether they wear nail polish, the ways that they do those things. Your expression can be very, very different from your gender itself. Say, for instance, there are non-binary people who will dress in sometimes very traditionally feminine clothing or very traditionally masculine clothing. That gender expression doesn't change that their internal gender identity is still non-binary. This also differs from sex assigned at birth, which is the third listing here. Sex assigned at birth is effectively your genitals. So when a baby is born, the doctor grabs that baby, looks it over and says, this is a girl, this is a boy. Now, there is a way to look at this where it's 3 dots, as you see on the screen now. We prefer to look at it more as a spectrum because intersex people are often overlooked in the LGBTQ population. So even though they make up like, I think it's like a fifth, like a tenth of, it's some dramatically high number of people are intersex, whether they recognize that at birth or later in life. And there's all sorts of different ways for an individual to be intersex. So it's not just about your genitals, it's your sex assigned at birth also makes up your chromosomes, your hormone levels, all sorts of internal and external representations of your sex that go into what's called a sex assigned at birth. So it's far more complicated than we like to talk about it being, right? It's not just this one thing or the other. It's very much a spectrum of identities. And then the last 2 things at the bottom, you'll see physically attracted to and emotionally attracted to. I wanted to leave those on the screen because I think they're important, but they have very little to do with the conversation that we're having right now about gender. So your gender identity is entirely separate from your sexual orientation, your sexual identity, your romantic identity. They have essentially no correlation, which means that any person of any gender can love any person of any gender. And your gender identity doesn't necessarily confine you to a certain sexual orientation. So that's really important to note that that's an important part of a person's identity, but it has very little to do with the conversation about their gender identity. Okay, so You may have heard the term transitioning. We prefer to talk about it as being as an individual choosing to live authentically. So in this circumstance, we talk about three versions of living authentically. The first is social. So when a person decides to start living their gender authentically, they might come out to their friends and family. They might use new name or new pronouns. They might announce that on social media or by email or whatever. And they also might start changing their clothing or other aspects of their gender presentation, like we were talking about earlier. There's also medical, a form of medical choices that a person might make when they decide to start living authentically. So they may seek medical support and receive a gender dysphoria diagnosis. They may start hormones like testosterone or estrogen. They may undergo surgery, and they may get hair removal or hair implants. It's important to note, though, that they don't have to do those things. So there's no form of transition or living authentically that requires medical intervention. So a person may want to do those things, they may choose to do those things, they may not want to do those things. They also may not be able to do those things because of access to healthcare barriers or financial barriers that keep them from doing so. So all that to say, we don't gatekeep a person's identity based on their access to medical care or their choice to undergo medical care. And then the last part where I come in is the legal changes that a person might make when it comes to living authentically. So particularly, there's a lot of them, but particularly you'll see name and gender marker changes and updating identity documents to accurately reflect a person's identity. So I'm going to do a little true or false. I'm going to go through it quick since I don't have a live audience. Usually we like bully the audience into talking, but I can't do that today. So first, true or false, a transgender man is someone who was not assigned male at birth, but has an internal gender identity that is male. This is true. So what does this mean about the definition of a transgender woman? A transgender woman is someone who was not assigned female at birth, but has an internal gender identity that is female. So next one, a transgender person has an internal gender that is the opposite of the sex they were assigned at birth. And this one's kind of a trick question. It's false, because this assumes that there is one and an opposite. It assumes a gender binary, when in fact there's a whole array of genders between those 2 points. And then finally, the definition of transgender includes some type of medical treatment or transition. And like I talked about earlier, this is also false. It can include medical treatment, but it does not have to. Okay, now let's talk about pronouns. So I may have already used this term, and I definitely will coming up, but and I'm sure you've heard it before, to misgender someone means to intentionally or unintentionally refer to that person with pronouns that does not align with their gender. So this is a really common mistake. It can be used on purpose to harass a person. It can be done really unintentionally, whether we don't know someone's gender or we just slip up. It's a really common mistake. But it's important to know that when we use someone's pronouns, but we use the incorrect ones, it can cause harm to that person. It can cause genuine internal harm. So when we make appearance-based assumptions about someone's gender, we perpetuate damaging gender stereotypes, and we risk misgendering people in our professional lives and our everyday lives. So it's important, if you know someone's pronouns, to really intentionally go about using those accurately as much as possible every single time you talk about that person, every time you interact with that person, because otherwise there's a genuine emotional damage that is done when we fail to do that. So what happens if you, like all of us have, mess up someone's pronouns? The tendency, I think, is to over apologize as a cis person, particularly. I think, especially when you don't mean to and it just slips out, or you're not thinking about it, or you don't know someone's pronouns. The tendency is to apologize and make a whole thing out of it, but you don't need to do that. In fact, I think it draws more attention to the person who messed up if you do go about doing that. So instead, rather than making a whole big apology and like DMing the person the next day or whatever. It's better to simply apologize, correct yourself, and move on with your life. So the example that Delaney usually uses is to say, I was looking over his work, I'm sorry, their work. They have a great thesis, and I think they're on the right track. Or if you're corrected, to say, thank you, I apologize, their work, and to move on with your life and not make a big deal out of it. Because the issue that arises when you start making it about you is that your intent may be good, your intention may be good, but the impact it has on the person is pretty harmful. You know, it puts the burden on the other person to forgive you for something, or it points out your mistakes to the other person in a way that puts the burden on them. So it's important to just keep going with your life, do your best every time you interact with a person to use the correct pronouns, no matter who they are. Just make it a daily deal. So we are going to move on really quickly to IDs. So why does it matter that a person's identity documents are accurate? Why did Delaney and I start doing this work at KU Law? So a 2015 survey of trans people in Kansas found that 81% of respondents reported none of their IDs had the correct name and gender they identified with. 81% of respondents said none of their IDs had the correct name and gender. Nearly 45% of respondents reported they could not update their IDs because they could not afford to. They couldn't afford to hire a lawyer to do a name change. They couldn't afford to hire a lawyer to do a gender marker change. And finally, 24% of respondents said that their lack of updated ID actually led to them being verbally assaulted, denied benefits or services, asked to leave establishments, or assaulted. This percentage is even higher for trans individuals who are in racial minorities, and this is true across the nation as well. So Delaney and I decided to undertake this work and make this a focus of our law school career because it's a genuine problem for people, and because it's such a barrier to accessing necessary services and parts of life. So I'm gonna get into the legal stuff really quick. Oh, I've got plenty of time. Okay, so I'm gonna do first name changes, and then I'm gonna do gender marker changes. I'm gonna go as slow as possible, and I am gonna say there's a lot of detail here. There's just a lot of information. So it's okay if you don't catch, if this is something you're interested in, or this is something that a loved one is interested in undergoing, and you're trying to figure out how to do it yourself. I want this to be a starting place for you, but it's not necessarily going to be the place where you get every single detail down, just because there's so much information and people's circumstances differ pretty considerably. So what I'm going to try to do is give you the critical stuff. You're welcome to screenshot or whatever. And then I'm going to give you resources that have pretty much every detail you could need, or resources where you could call attorneys and get more information, and they will get you the resources you need. So don't be afraid if this is not like every single detail you need, if this is a little bit overwhelming. I'm doing my best to break it down, but know that I am going to be providing resources within this, and I'm gonna have Brandon put a couple up on the Facebook chat as well. So there's places to go, there's people to talk to, don't worry. So we're gonna start with name changes. The important thing to know about name changes in Kansas is that it does require a court order. So this is a process that you can undergo yourself, or you can undergo with an attorney. But one way or another, you will be filing paperwork to a court, and you will be getting paperwork back from that court that a judge has signed somewhere along the way. Depending on where you are in Kansas, you may or may not have to have a hearing. Depending on the judge, you may or may not have to have a hearing. But above all, this is different from other identity document changes because it is a court process. You also must be a resident of Kansas for at least the past 60 days to be able to qualify for a name change in Kansas. So I should also say all of this law is Kansas specific. If I have non-Kansans in the audience, hello, welcome. So happy to have you. But as long as you are not a resident of Kansas, the name change stuff is not going to apply to you. And if you are not born in Kansas, the gender marker stuff is not going to apply to you. I'll get to that in a second. But know that all of this name change information is for people who are residents of Kansas for the past 60 days. So another part of the name change process here is that you must provide notice to interested parties. Usually this is just creditors, by publication or by certified mail. The court has discretion to allow that you send notice to parties by certified mail. So basically you just like pull up a list of your creditors, you pull up like a credit report, you see who you owe money to, you send certified mail to that location, alerting them that you're going to have your name changed. It's a pretty simple process, and we have some forms available online for people who want to do it themselves. But just know you may have to do it by publication, which means that you publish an ad in a newspaper in the county that you live in, alerting everyone of your name change. This requirement is meant to keep you from defrauding people. Historically, it's literally like to keep bandits from changing their names and defrauding half the county. But it is a genuinely restrictive and harmful requirement in the modern age that a lot of states are abolishing because it's expensive, it's time consuming, and it also requires you to out yourself to your entire county, basically. So I want to acknowledge off the top that that is a pretty cruddy requirement. We don't love it, but it still exists. So fourth, you will usually have to pay a filing fee to the court. In Douglas County, where the Douglas County Legal Aid Society operates, it's $197. I think it's $195 minimum by statute. So you will have to pay at least $195 filing fee, unless you are making 100% or less of the poverty line. So, sorry, there's a cat in the background. So you will have to, you can meet certain financial requirements to be able to opt out of paying that, but I'll warn you that the financial requirements are pretty restrictive. And finally, you file a handful of paperwork to the court, including your filing fee, including notice of your publication, and as well as a petition. And the judge grants the order and then sends the order back to you, and that order becomes the thing that you use to prove to the public, to the government, to whoever, that you have a new legal name. Now, the good news is, some people get nervous, I think, that the court is just gonna deny them their name change because they're a trans person, because they're non-binary, just because the court doesn't understand. Thankfully, by law, the court must grant your name change order if the statements in the petition are true, so if they have no reason to believe that you're lying, and if there is reasonable cause for a name change. And this doesn't have to be a particular cause, it really can be any cause. So we do have some protections under the law that say that a court can't just arbitrarily say, oh, no name change for you, right? And just anecdotally, I have not heard of that ever happening in the state. So, and if it does, let me know. But yes, that's the name change process. It is more particular than that, but the good news is there's tons and tons of resources for all sorts of people who want to undergo this process by themselves or who want to undergo this process with the support of an attorney. So I'm gonna send some links at the very end of this and make sure that they get posted on the Facebook page. But ways that you can undergo a name change, essentially, you can contact a private attorney. Generally, family law attorneys can do name changes. It's a pretty simple process. So pretty much anyone who's doing like general legal practice, which is common in a lot of rural counties, pretty much any private attorney can figure a name change out. You can also find free representation that is available based on your income. So the two places that I recommend for name changes are Kansas Legal Services, the Legal Aid Society of Kansas that provides free representation to low-income people, and the Douglas County Legal Aid Society, which is operated out of KU Law. They have a particular specialty in name changes, and they do them for people all across the state. So if you don't make a lot of money, if you think there's any chance that you could possibly qualify, I recommend calling, because both places will be able to tell you whether you qualify. They don't mind you calling, even if for some reason you don't qualify for those services. And if you call and you don't qualify, they know tons of attorneys who are reliable, who will be able to do it for you for a fee. So I highly recommend calling if you think there's any chance you qualify. And finally, you can do it on your own. So you can file a name change, what we call in the law, because we have to call everything something stupid, pro se, which means on your own. So some of the links that I'm going to send are from Kansas Legal Services. You'll see a screenshot on the right side of the screen right now. KLS has 2 different packets of information that are just guides for how you can do your own name change without the help of an attorney and at pretty low cost. There is one for adults and there is one for minors. And I also did write the one for minors. So I can tell you, it's pretty comprehensive. You got like a really thorough guide, a walkthrough of how you do it, instructions for who to contact at various courts, and then the actual documents, the actual paperwork you will have to file with the court. So if you want to undertake it on your own, there are absolutely resources to do so. And if you just Google KLS name change guide, both of them come up, the first 2 things. So now that we have name changes under our belts, let's talk about gender marker changes. So in Kansas, prior to 2019, prior to June of 2019, it was illegal to change your gender marker on your birth certificate. And it had been for about 15 years at that point. There's some stories of people who managed to do it kind of like by accident, but for the most part, no one was allowed to change their gender marker on their birth certificate at all for basically in all of the 2000s before 2019. In June 2019, June 21st, 2019, the federal court here in Kansas decided that that law that kept people from changing their gender markers was unconstitutional and that it could no longer be in operation. So as of that date, it became possible for Kansans, people who were born in Kansas, to change their gender markers on their birth certificate. We just personally, I heard about this and we had called up the Office of Vital Statistics to see what the process was, and they didn't really have a process in place. So pretty quickly after, some people at KU Law and KLS worked together to publish a packet for how to change your gender marker. So I'm pretty familiar with the process. We also do have a resource up online for that. But all this to say, we're very excited and pleased that a lot of states, every state in orange here, it is nearly impossible to change your gender marker. But in Kansas, it's not only possible, it's actually one of the least restrictive processes, one of the easiest processes in the nation for doing that task. So we're talking specifically about gender markers on birth certificates, like the one that I showed you at the beginning of the presentation. This applies to anyone who was born in Kansas, because if you were born in Kansas, you received a Kansas birth certificate that the Office of Vital Statistics then held and will hold for like hundreds of years to come. If you were born outside of Kansas, you will have to go through the process that is designated by your state's laws. I still recommend that you call Douglas County Legal Aid because they can maybe connect you with attorneys in various areas, in various states who know more about those processes. They can't help you themselves, but they'll be able to provide you with resources and potentially make connections, especially in Missouri. We just know a lot of people in Missouri. So how do you do a gender marker in Kansas? Unlike the name change, this is not a court order. There is no judge involvement in the gender marker process. Instead, it is simply an administrative application that you file with the Kansas Office of Vital Statistics. So there's 5 components. It's very simple. You fill out an application, and all of this is on the website as well. If you just Google Kansas gender marker change, there's a packet that walks you through it. So there's a specific application that you fill out. It's really just like information about yourself so that they can find your birth certificate, because they have like millions of them. Affidavit. So you sign a form that you have to get notarized that says, yes, this is me, and yes, this is something I want to do. You provide them with a copy front and back of state issued ID if you have state issued ID. And you have to get a certification from a health professional. So this is the most restrictive part of the process. And I know it can be really difficult for people to get access to healthcare, especially in parts of the state where there are just fewer hospitals and fewer doctors, and particularly fewer affirming doctors. So this isn't easy for everyone, so to say. But essentially all you need to get from the health professional is a certification that uses the exact language on the screen. So the health professional says, yes, it is true that this person is seeking a gender marker change so that their identity aligns with their true gender identity, and that they genuinely are experiencing these things and that the doctor has signed off on it. We wish this wasn't necessary, but it is necessary, unfortunately. If you have gotten your gender marker changed in a different state, you can bypass this certification. You can use the driver's license or the passport or whatever to prove it instead. So you have a $15 or money order, no cash, and you put them in an envelope and you mail them to the Office of Vital Stats. And 6 to 8 weeks later, the Office of Vital Stats mails you back your amended birth certificate. The birth certificate will look essentially the same, except that in the upper corner, like I showed you, the gender marker will be changed, and there will be a stamp on it that says amended, but it will not say what's amended. So it'll look the exact same as someone who accidentally had their name misspelled for the first time on their birth certificate and had to have it amended. So it doesn't say like, this is a transgender person, this is a non-binary person, but it does tell you that the birth certificate has been changed. I should also say, Kansas does not have a gender neutral gender marker for their birth certificate or their driver's license currently. It's something that advocates are working on. I think there's currently like 21 states that do allow the gender marker. The X marker usually is what it is. But unfortunately, we just don't have that in Kansas. So you'll have to choose between M and F. Another question we get pretty commonly, what does this process look like for minors? It's almost the exact same thing. It's the exact same forms. It's the same required materials. The only difference is you have to have a legal guardian's name and signature on the application and affidavit instead of the minors. They sign in place of the minor. And then the state issued ID that you print can be the legal guardian's ID. And a legal guardian, I use that term broadly. It can be a parent. It can be anyone with who's had parentage established. It can be a guardian if there is no parent in the picture. Generally, it can be a parent, but I try to be as broad as possible about that. So the next question we usually get, what about other identity documents? There's tons of them. I'm aware that it is just like an absolute mess of a process. You have to worry about your birth certificate, your driver's license, your social security, your passport, your insurance, all of that. So a couple things off the bat, the name change order does not automatically correct the birth certificate. So once you get the name change order, you will have to file another application to get your birth certificate changed if you want to. You also don't have to because you can use the name change order to change your driver's license or your passport without going through the birth certificate process. It's very weird, I'm aware. But if you want to change your birth certificate name, that will be a separate application. It'll be the same process as the gender marker, but you'll have to do another one. As for driver's licenses, social security, passport, insurance, those are all going to be different processes. You'll have to do those after you've completed the name change and the gender marker change if you want both of those. And each of them is going to have their own process. Thankfully, there are a lot of guides on the internet, especially for federal stuff like the social security and the passport, that will walk you through that process pretty specifically. But these are all going to be different processes, basically. We also generally, you'll want to do the name change and the gender marker first, because these are, they're the stem of all of your legal rights when it comes to other identity documents. So you'll use the changes on these two documents to be able to change all the driver's license. So usually when you change your driver's license in Kansas, for instance, they'll require you to show them a name change order or to show them your updated birth certificate. So you want to do those first and then figure out the other changes. And the good news is that there's people to help. For instance, in 4 or 5 months, I will be an attorney doing all of this work very specifically with Kansas Legal Aid. So again, not an attorney, none of this is legal advice, but in just a couple of months, Kansas will have a dedicated attorney who can help you sort through this stuff. So feel free to give me a call then. You also can still contact Douglas County Legal Aid and KLS currently because they have people who understand some of this stuff and are willing to help. And even when they can't help, they don't have capacity to, or it's just not really in their realm, they can provide you with resources and try to connect you with people who know more information about all this. Okay, I think that's all the information I have. I think that's everything. I want to say thank you to everyone. It has been an honor and a pleasure, and I hope that was not too much of an overload for you all. And also, this is my contact information on the screen, and please, please, please feel free to shoot me an email, shoot Delaney an email. There are emails on here as well, and we're happy to help however we can.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We did have one question in the chat. And they were wondering if the change announced, is the change announced anywhere publicly? Is it a matter of public record in regards to the name change?
So it depends on how you provide notice. There is a requirement for notice, like I mentioned. If you do notice by publication in a newspaper, it will show up in a newspaper. Or it kind of depends on your county. Some counties do notice by publication through their website, and some have them in really small newspapers. But if you take that route, which is the traditional route, yes, it will be publicly noticed, and it will say your dead name, it'll say your new name, just to warn you, it is pretty specific about your identity. That's why we generally try to recommend that people apply for service by, or pardon me, notice by certified mail. Because when you do notice by certified mail, you literally just send your creditors a letter. You do have to get the court to agree to let you do that, but it's a quick little thing to the court where you say, hey, can I do this? And the court generally says yes, and then you send certified mail, and it doesn't become public record anywhere. Does that make sense? Hopefully.
Well, thank you. We're going to hop off of Facebook here. We'll still be on the Zoom. I'll post the Zoom information in the chat or in the comments. So if you do have any questions for our presenter today, log on to Zoom, and we'll be on for about 10 minutes. Give about 10 minutes to see if anybody hops on. There is a link in the comments for an exit survey. If you could please take a moment to fill that out so that we can plan our future Q&A talks. These are monthly events in partnership with the Independence Public Library through a grant called Libraries Transform Communities. So thank you, Ellen, and I'll post the chat and the Zoom information in the chat, and I hope to see you all for a live Q&A session. So, 1 second here.